With just 57 days to go until the election, today we'll be taking a look at the 2024 electoral map based on polling averages from every single state. And I really do mean it this time. We're going to take a look at every single poll that has been released between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump from every state where we have data to fill in this map. We'll begin on the West Coast with Washington, where Kamala Harris leads on average by 11.3%. The most recent poll has her ahead by just 5 points. This is already a big drop-off for the vice president from where Biden was 4 years ago when he won Washington by 19 points. So the state is only going to be likely blue on our map. Down in Oregon, it gets even worse for Kamala Harris. She leads by just 5%, according to the only poll we have from the state between her and the former president. Oregon, then, is going to be placed into the lean blue column. And down in California, this is Kamala Harris's home state. She served as the California Attorney General and then as a senator from California until she became vice president. In her home state, she leads by 24.5 percentage points. This is worse than Joe Biden's performance in 2020 when he won the state by nearly 30 points. The Golden State is going to be solid blue, but honestly, Kamala Harris should be doing better. Moving on to the first competitive state on this map, we have the state of Nevada, a state that Donald Trump lost in both of the last two elections. He lost it by 2.4% to both Joe Biden and Hillary Clinton. But today, he has a very good chance at flipping a state that no Republican has won since 2004. According to the polling average, Kamala Harris does have a very slight lead. She's ahead by 0.6% against the former president. She surged in the month of July. However, as we're coming into September, more and more polls are showing that her lead is disappearing, and it won't be long until Trump takes back the lead in the polling average. But what you have to consider is that polls always overestimate Democrats, and Trump being behind by 0.6% essentially means that he's probably going to win the state. According to Polymarket's odds, Donald Trump currently has a 54% chance at winning a state he has never won before. So Nevada is going to be tilted blue on our map, but in the end, I do fully expect it to vote in favor of Donald Trump. We also have a very competitive race in Arizona, 11 electoral votes, a state that went to Trump in 2016 by nearly 4 points. He lost it by one of the narrowest margins possible in 2020, losing to the now president by just 0.3%. This was the second closest state in the entire country. Only Georgia was more competitive. Looking at the polling average today, Donald Trump leads by 1.6%. And you did see that in July, Kamala Harris did do better, a lot better actually, than how Joe Biden was performing before he dropped out. But her lead and her dominance in the race has really started to disappear. Donald Trump is undoubtedly the favorite once again. He's taking the lead back in Arizona and has led in virtually every single recent poll from the state. If Arizona goes red, Nevada is very likely to do so as well. And so Arizona is going to be our first state on the map going for Trump, and it will be tilt Republican, barely missing out on being lean. We also have our first ever poll from Colorado between Harris and Trump, and yes, Kamala Harris is doing well in this poll conducted by Morning Consult, but Morning Consult is a very left-leaning pollster, and this is the problem that I have with 538. They put in every single pollster, and they allow these left-leaning pollsters to take up so much of the weight on their site. I mean, the New York Times takes up a huge percentage of the weighing, and honestly, their polls were really bad in both 2016, 2020, and even 2022. And this Morning Consult poll is no different. They've had polls showing Kamala Harris leading in states like Pennsylvania and Nevada by 10 points. I mean, their margins are just not even realistic. And so Harris does lead by 15 points in this one poll, but you do have to take it with a giant grain of salt. This is similar to Biden's 14-point margin of victory in 2020, but in the end, it is very unlikely that Kamala Harris is even going to win Colorado by 10 points, much less 15. But for the purposes of this map, we are going to fill in Colorado as a solid blue state, but just barely. New Mexico, though, is going to be more competitive. Kamala Harris leads by 10 points in the most recent poll. This is another one of those left-leaning pollsters, The Hill and Emerson College. Their polls generally are better, though, than Morning Consult's, but they're not great. Harris plus 10 is okay. She's still probably going to do worse than Joe Biden, probably will win it by less than 7 points. But on our map, New Mexico is going to be likely blue. Moving on to these states in the middle of the country, and like I said, we're going to go over every single state where we have data. This is going to be a very comprehensive map, even if these states are solid for one candidate or the other. So in Utah, Trump leads by 32 points in the only poll released, while in Montana, he's ahead by nearly 18. He's going to help Tim Sheehy unseat the incumbent Democratic Senator here, Jon Tester, who is probably the most vulnerable Democrat running for re-election. We also have in Nebraska, Trump leading by 17 points, although this is not really the greatest poll. Split ticket does tend to lean to the left, while in the 2nd district, Kamala Harris leads by 6% on average. Again, Trump is still in a good position to win here. Polling from these congressional districts tend to be pretty inaccurate, but right now, Harris has a lead, but Joe Biden's lead, I will say, was significantly larger in 2020 than Harris's is right now. And in Oklahoma, Donald Trump leads by 16 points. So we have data from 4 out of these rural states, Utah, Montana, Nebraska, and Oklahoma, all going to be solid red, while Nebraska is going to be lean in favor of Harris. Moving down to Texas, its 40 electoral votes will be a big prize for Donald Trump. Texas was considered to be relatively competitive in 2020. There were many points in time in which Joe Biden was leading in the Lone Star State's polling average. In fact, right before the election, the polling said Donald Trump was going to win Texas by just 1%. It ended up being totally wrong. He won the state by 6 times that margin. And today, the former president leads Harris by 7.3%. With this being the polling average, he's probably going to be able to win by at least a double-digit margin. But on our map, Texas will go in favor of Trump by 7 points. It is going to be a likely red state. Its 40 electoral votes will be crucial for the former president. Yes, generally Texas is shifting to the left, but it's going to take Democrats a very, very long time to actually be able to flip the millions of voters they need to flip in order to take this state. We also have a poll from Alaska, our first ever poll from the last frontier state. Trump leads by 10%. Polling in Alaska tends to be pretty shoddy as well. In the end, Trump can probably win by 15 points, although generally Alaska has been shifting in favor of Democrats. They elected Mary Peltola, a Democrat, to be their sole House representative in early 2022. But today, Alaska still leans to the right, and it'll still go to Trump. But on our map, it is going to be likely red. And we're going to fill in all of these states where we don't have data from at the very end of this video, so don't worry about that. But for right now, we're just going to focus on the states where we do have actual polls. Before I continue, only 16% of you guys are actually subscribed, so please take the time to subscribe right now for more content like this leading up to the election in November. And follow me on Twitter for daily political updates, link in the description below. Moving on now to the Midwest, this is going to be a highly consequential region, and I'm just going to show you right now the states that Kamala Harris needs to win in order to have a chance at winning this election. She needs to win in Minnesota, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. She cannot lose any one of these 4 states, and unfortunately for her, all 4 of these states are very competitive. The only good news I really have for Harris is that since she chose Tim Walz, the governor of Minnesota, to be her running mate, she is going to perform a lot better there than she otherwise would have. If Joe Biden had stayed in the race, Democrats would have lost Minnesota entirely, a state they haven't lost since 1972. But today, Kamala Harris leads by a 5.5% margin. Honestly, it's not that strong of a margin. She was ahead by 10 points in a previous Survey USA poll. This poll from the end of July. This is right after Kamala Harris announced her campaign. She was ahead by 10 points. Today, she's ahead by just 5. And so if Minnesota gets competitive, if Kamala Harris can't even outperform Joe Biden, who won Minnesota by 7 points in 2020, with Tim Walz on the ballot with her, she's probably not going to win this election. So right now, Minnesota is only going to be a lean blue state. We actually don't have any polling from Iowa just because of how well Trump is doing there. People know he's going to win, and so there really aren't any surveys being conducted there so far, but I'm sure we'll get some numbers soon. In Wisconsin, though, this is a very heavily polled state. It's a state that Kamala Harris cannot lose. And right now, she does lead in the polling average. She's ahead by 1.5%. But this is absolutely no guarantee that she's going to win. She's only ahead because of this one Bloomberg poll. Bloomberg does their polling with Morning Consult, who I mentioned earlier was a very left-leaning pollster. And so Kamala Harris is probably going to lose her lead pretty soon once this poll expires. And Wisconsin generally does tend to be the most conservative out of the three Rust Belt states of Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania that form the blue wall. The only reason why she's doing better in Wisconsin than she is in Pennsylvania is because she chose Tim Walz, but that impact is going to fizzle out in the coming weeks. And just look at the polling in 2020. Joe Biden was supposed to win Wisconsin by 6.7%. He eventually won it by 0.7. This is how much polling in Wisconsin overestimated Democrats. Kamala Harris leading by 1.5%, with one poll giving her a super unrealistic 8-point lead, says nothing about the state of the race. Trump is probably going to win in Wisconsin, but for the purposes of this map, just based on the numbers right now, Wisconsin is going to be a tilt blue state. While down in Illinois, the vice president is ahead by 16, just above that 15-point solid state threshold, while in Michigan, this is another key state. And out of all of the swing states, the 7 most competitive states on this map, which are Nevada, Arizona, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, and Georgia, Michigan is the most left-leaning. If she's going to win any of these toss-ups, it is going to be the Wolverine state first. Kamala Harris leads by 1.2%, but she has the same issue that she does in Wisconsin. Joe Biden was heavily overestimated in Michigan. If you look at the 538 average, Biden was supposed to win by 6-7 points. On Real Clear Politics, the average was a little bit better, but in the end, Biden still did worse than expected, and so Harris leading by 1.2%. Honestly, it's not enough. But right now, just based on the numbers, it is going to be another tilt blue state on our map. In the Buckeye state of Ohio, though, Trump is doing very well. He leads by 9%, nearly a double-digit margin. Even Emerson College, again, a left-leaning pollster, has him ahead by 10 points. Ohio is no doubt going to go to the former president for a third time in a row, and it will be lean red on our map. Trump is probably going to do a lot better than he did in 2020 when he won the state by 8 points, and even in 2016 when he won it by just 0.1% more. We also have polling from Pennsylvania. This is a super important state for both camps. Basically, whoever wins Pennsylvania is going to win the election, because if Donald Trump wins Pennsylvania, he's also going to win North Carolina, Georgia, and Arizona, and that will be enough for him to get over 270 electoral votes when all the other states are filled in. If Harris wins Pennsylvania, she will also have to win Wisconsin and Michigan, which are not at all guaranteed. And so Pennsylvania's 19 electoral votes are currently very much up for grabs. It is a super competitive state with a tie in the polling average, but basically every single poll here has shown Trump to be in the lead. The only one that is Harris ahead is this one poll conducted by Morning Consult and Bloomberg. Like I said, again, they really are screwing up these polling averages, and just look at where former Democrats were at this point in Pennsylvania during September of their campaigns. In 2016, Hillary Clinton led by 6.2%. In 2020, Joe Biden led by 4.3%. And spoiler alert, Hillary Clinton lost Pennsylvania in 2016, and Joe Biden barely won it in 2020. And so Trump being in a tied race, he's doing very well, considering the fact that he does lead in a majority of these polls. We're going to place the Keystone State into the tilt red category. Up in the Northeast, we have a lot of polls from states that are generally more favorable to Harris, beginning in New York. She leads by 14 points, which will be shy of a solid margin, while in Vermont, this is the most liberal state in the entire country. The vice president is ahead by 41 points, and in New Hampshire, Kamala Harris leads by 5%. This is one of the more competitive states. In 2016, Trump almost flipped the Granite State, losing to Hillary Clinton by less than half a percentage point. This time around, Kamala Harris is probably going to do a little bit better than Harris, but not as well as Biden did in 2020 when he won the state by a likely margin. And so New York is going to be likely red along with New Hampshire, while Vermont is going to be a solid blue state, as it typically is. This is the home state of Bernie Sanders. Up in Maine, though, we do have some pretty bad polling According to the RCP average, Kamala Harris currently leads by 13 points. It's going to be a likely blue state on our map, but in the end, it's going to be decided by less than 5 points. We're probably going to see a margin similar to that of Hillary Clinton's from 2016 when she won the state by less than 3%. The University of New Hampshire, which has done many of these polls in Maine, they're a really poor pollster. I mean, just look at their polling from the first district. Kamala Harris plus 28, plus 21, and in the statewide average, Kamala Harris plus 13. I mean, Joe Biden didn't even win Maine by a solid margin. There's basically no chance that Kamala Harris is going to do better here than Joe Biden. And even by a 4-point margin, that's basically impossible. So you really cannot trust this polling here. But for the purposes of this map, we are just going to go with it. In the second district, Kamala Harris is ahead by 1.5%. Although in my mind, there's no doubt that Trump is going to win the second district of Maine for a third time in a row, like he did in 2016 and for a second time in 2020. But for now, based on just the numbers, it is going to be tilt in favor of the vice president. Moving down to the southeastern quadrant, we have 3 new polls from Maryland, which on average have Kamala Harris ahead by 27 points, still worse than Joe Biden's 33-point margin of victory from 2020, while in Missouri, Donald Trump leads by 15 points on average. This is a pretty strong margin for the former president. Missouri almost went blue as late as 2008. It was one of the more competitive states for quite a while. It definitely went both ways in the late 1990s, the early 2000s. In Tennessee, Donald Trump is ahead by 26%, and he leads by an even larger 27-point margin in West Virginia. So we have 2 more solid red states to add onto the map. And so we're left now with really only 4 more competitive states: Virginia, North Carolina, Georgia, and Florida. We're going to begin up in Virginia, a state just like Minnesota that probably would have went to Donald Trump if Joe Biden hadn't dropped out of the election. But even with Harris having replaced the incumbent president as the Democratic nominee, Virginia is still going to be close. Kamala Harris leads by just 4% in the polling average in a state that Joe Biden won by a double-digit margin just 4 years ago. Virginia also recently elected a Republican governor in 2021, and generally the state is shifting to the right and is relatively more favorable to Trump than it was in the last election. And so if Donald Trump works hard in Virginia, he has a very good shot at flipping it red for the first time since 2004. But on our map for right now, Virginia is going to be a highly competitive lean blue state. Down in North Carolina, we have a state that was very competitive in 2020. Basically, all the polling said that Joe Biden was going to win it, but in the end, he lost. Trump carried the Tar Heel state by just over 1%. He won it by 4 points in 2016. It's a state Trump has never lost in before, and he's recently retaken the lead in the polling average. Trump leads by 0.1%. Kamala Harris is very far away from where she needs to be in terms of actually being able to win this state. Joe Biden led throughout the entirety of the 2020 election cycle in North Carolina. There was not a single point in the polling average where Trump took the lead, and in that scenario, Biden still lost. So Kamala Harris has a lot of catching up to do. There's no doubt Donald Trump is going to win North Carolina for a third time in a row. According to the betting markets, he has a 61% chance of doing so. And so the Tar Heel state is going to be tilt red on our map, but I'm pretty confident that he's going to win it by at least 2 points in the very end. We also have a competitive race in Georgia, although what's different here is that in 2020, it actually voted in favor of Joe Biden. This came as a surprise, as people didn't really expect Georgia to vote to the left of North Carolina. But Georgia is still a fundamentally red state, with Trump having won it by 5 points in 2016, and in 2022, Governor Brian Kemp won his re-election by over 5 points as a Republican. According to today's polling average, Trump is on track to winning the Peach State by 0.3%. The bettors are on his side as well. He has a 60% chance of flipping Georgia back. I think this is pretty accurate. Donald Trump is the clear favorite in Georgia, just like he is in North Carolina. It's still going to be competitive, but in the end, I can see him winning by more than 2 points here as well. And finally, in Florida, we have 30 electoral votes that are pretty easily going to go to Trump. This is a huge boost for Republicans because just 4 years ago, Florida was still considered the ultimate battleground. It was a very competitive state. I mean, just look at 2012. It was the only tilt state on the map. In 2016, it went to Trump, but still by a tilt margin. Although in 2020, Trump did better than anyone could have expected. Nobody thought he was even going to win this state, but he ended up on top by 3 points. And in 2022, Ron DeSantis, the Republican governor of Florida, won his re-election by over 20 points. And in 2024, Trump is on track to winning it by 6%. In the end, he can probably win by up to a double-digit margin. I mean, just look at the 2020 polling. Donald Trump was supposed to lose it by 1%. Joe Biden led throughout basically the entirety of the campaign cycle, but he still ended up losing Florida at the very end. And so there's no doubt Trump is going to carry the Sunshine State for a third time in a row, and he's probably going to win it by a likely margin, even if the polling only gives him a lean margin of victory as of right now. And so this is basically the entire map filled in, all the states where we have data from. You can see it slowly starting to fill in more and more as the election nears. And so now I'm going to fill in all of the remaining states. They're pretty solid for one candidate or the other. That's why there isn't much polling from them. Idaho, Wyoming, North and South Dakota, as well as Kansas, all easily going to go to Trump, along with the 1st and 3rd districts of Nebraska, Arkansas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, South Carolina, Kentucky, Indiana, and Iowa, which is going to be likely red. Kamala Harris, though, she is the favorite in Hawaii, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, and Connecticut, while New Jersey and Delaware are likely blue states. And of course, the District of Columbia is going to be solid blue. And so based on the polling averages we have right now, Donald Trump is on track to winning the election with 280 electoral votes. Kamala Harris at 258. I will say, though, this map heavily underestimates the former president, just like it did in 2020 and 2016. If you go back 4 and 8 years ago, polling said that Hillary Clinton was going to win 350 electoral votes. Joe Biden was going to win 330, 340. Today, Donald Trump leads in the polling, which he has never done before, and it really signals just how much better he is doing compared to the last 2 elections. And as time goes on, Trump has only been expanding his lead in states where he is ahead, and he's catching up quickly in states where he's behind. And so based on the current map, Trump is in a very good position to win a second non-consecutive term in the White House this November. Thank you guys so much for watching. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe right now for more content like this leading up to the election. And join my Discord server, link in the description below.